Hello.
Hello, Eric.
Hey, Sam.
How are you?
Doing great.
Long time no see.
Yes, indeed.
So, Eric, you are a professor of speech pathology at Pacific University, and you just finished up your second year as an assistant professor there.
hmm
Terrific. Terrific. Thanks for sharing with us today. The students are going to appreciate hearing about your research work.
My pleasure.
So, what study would you like to share about, and what do you think is interesting about this study?
Sure. I'll talk about a study that I recently have written up, and it's under revision right now. We submitted it to a journal, so it's pretty easy for me to talk about because I've spent a lot of time with this particular study. What we did here was we were looking at the types of questions that preschool teachers asked to preschool students with autism. Uh, yeah, and
So
the
it's these preschool teachers are working with children with autism, and you just looked at different times in the day where they were asking questions?
we looked at one time of the day, so we were only looking at center time. What we had was a corpus of videotapes of children during center time being followed by a video camera. And these videotapes were taken at the beginning of the school year. And what we were able to do was look at not just the teachers, but all adults in the classroom, look at the types of language that they used when interacting with the students. And what we were doing was just looking at the types of questions that were asked. So we coded the videos to see whether they were asked questions that were more cognitively complex, so things that ask children to predict or synthesize information or talk about something that's not there, like what did you do over the weekend? And those are the most difficult or the most complex questions. And then we looked at questions that were more concrete, like what color is this? Or what is this? And so something that would have a visual referent. And then we looked at questions that were designed to regulate behavior. So can you come here? Can you cut that? Those kinds of questions. And what we wanted to do was to see what types of questions were asked the majority of the time, if there was a difference between the types of questions that were asked, and also if the types of questions that were asked were related to characteristics such as the child's language ability, the child's cognitive ability, or how many adults were in the classroom relative to children.
Great. And so you did an observational study,
hmm
and then it sounds like this correlational analysis
Correct.
comparing the types of questions asked.
hmm
What did you compare it with? What was the correlation with?
So what we were doing, it wasn't really a correlation. What it was using a procedure called logistic regression. So
Okay.
what we could do is we could predict the probability of
Okay.
being asked a certain type of question based on these types of characteristics.
Okay. Terrific. And what was the outcome? What were the
Sure.
results?
What we found, which is really interesting, first, just looking at descriptive statistics, what we found was that there was a statistical difference between the types of questions that were asked. So the majority of questions that were asked were these management questions, the one designed to regulate behavior. And that's common in kids with autism and also in kids who are typically developing in preschools. What we typically see is that there's a lot of directive language, right? So it's not that surprising. Then we saw that the second most type of question that was asked were these lower cognitively complex questions, so those ones that were very concrete. And then finally what we saw was that there was really not a lot of those more cognitively complex questions asked. And so that's really telling because those kinds of questions are the ones that elicit more language. But it isn't necessarily surprising because a lot of times teachers and parents are trained not to ask those types of questions if they feel as though their children aren't ready for it.
Sure, sure.
So
Yeah, I
that's
just recently read a paper on that, the
Mhm.
merits of simplified language.
right. And so there is some debate about that, right? Because we also know that in general, the input is really important. And so even though simplified language is also important, we want to expose children to
Sure.
different types of language. We want to give them the opportunity to hear this more complex language. What's interesting is that, just as we would have suspected, the more there was a greater probability of being asked those more complex questions if the children had greater language ability. So what that shows us is that the
Okay.
adults in the classroom were indeed differentiating their language, which is
Sure.
good,
Sure, this
based on
bi-directionality of the relationship. Yes,
correct,
good. Interesting.
correct. And
Very interesting.
yeah, and what we also found was that more of these cognitively complex, challenging, more cognitively complex questions were asked if children were in classrooms where there were more adults in the classroom. So telling us that maybe there was this greater opportunity for responsive language to be more interactive, that there was more directionality going on, more of these transactions in classrooms where adults had more of a time to be able to interact with the kids. So those were our major findings of the study.
So it sounds like those major findings are good information to help you develop other research questions.
That's right. That's right. And so what we would want to do, because this was an observational study, what we want to do to take the next step is to actually transcribe the videotapes and see if different types of questions indeed had some sort of power over the length of response or the cognitive complexity of responses. What we also want to see are those, and look at those transactions more in depth, to see if certain adults in the classroom were scaffolding language behavior, and if they moved from using those questions that had lower cognitive complexity to ones that had greater cognitive complexity.
Okay, so and I can see the connection to clinical work and teaching work,
Right.
implications for practice, that you're looking for this predictive power of being able to give recommendations of what type of questions to ask children with autism to help facilitate their language development. That's fantastic.
Yeah, that's right.
So what do you think the most important thing for clinicians to understand about research is? What do you think?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things, because, and I'm sure you've discussed this in your class too, because I'm junior faculty and just starting out on this track, is that this is a procedure or a process, excuse me, that is going to evolve over many years. It's about developing a line of research. So my area of interest is looking at questions, but right now what I'm doing is primarily descriptive, trying to build a base, right?
So
and
to
then,
get the students to understand this process, that any one study has limitations and is kind of a step in a longer process.
That's right.
Oh, that's great. That's very interesting.
Yeah. And if you're conducting research, what you want to do is have a long-term plan. So my long-term plan with the study that I described to you and also with other lines of research that I'm conducting is to ultimately use this information to develop interventions for teaching children with autism and for also teaching children who communicate using augmentative and alternative communication, which is a major area of interest for me.
Terrific. So last question. Where do you think educational research should be headed?
Well, that's a very, very good question. I think right now the place where it is headed is into greater specificity. So as our technology develops, as our statistical procedures develop, what we can do is we can tailor interventions for children who might, for example, in autism, have some type of profile that they show, right? And so I think that as our ability to collect data through using tools like Lena, which we've discussed before, through being able to identify and describe things with greater specificity, I think we'll be able to design interventions that also have greater specificity.
Terrific.
Yeah.
Exciting stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
You can see how, I can see very clearly how that's important for driving practice.
Indeed.
Instead of just having general recommendations, getting more specific. That makes perfect sense.
Without a doubt.
Thanks for sharing about your exciting research. We look forward to hearing more from you.
You're very welcome. Thank you for this opportunity.
Oh, thank you. We'll have a nice day, and see you soon.
Sounds good. Bye.
Bye.